So thank you very much for your introduction, and it almost feels like I'm based in Saudi Arabia now.
Okay.
So, because this is my fourth lecture in a short time.
Okay, thank you.
So it's good to be among friends, even if it's only a webinar. So this is my university. It's in Aachen, which is in a funny location. The trees you see back here are already in the Netherlands. So from my office, which is here, I can see Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany, which I guess is a pretty unique location. So these are my conflicts of interest. And what I would like to do with you today is to update you on a few selected issues in CKD MBD management. So this is my first take-home message for you. Serum phosphate predicts all-cause and cardiovascular mortality in CKD patients. This is a study we did recently in the patients of the European Fresenius dialysis centers. And we looked for the relationship between serum phosphate and mortality. And we found that the lowest risk, no matter how we correct unadjusted, adjusted, or extended adjustment, the lowest risk is at 1.4 millimoles. So if you're a milligram country, multiply by 3. And you can see it sharply increases when the phosphate goes below this. And note that the two adjusted models are adjusted for albumin, so it's not just malnutrition. But there's also a very consistent increase when phosphate increases. This is another study we did some time ago in the European Cosmos cohort. So this, again, is a large cohort of dialysis patients. And here we did something important in addition. We asked what would happen if baseline phosphate is well controlled in the target range that we want to. What would happen if in the next 6 to 12 months it shifts? So if you're well controlled and the phosphate decreases, mortality increases. If the phosphate increases, mortality increases. So it's best to stay in the target range. But here's the really interesting condition. If you have hyperphosphatemia and it increases further, your mortality increases. But if you lower it, you have about a 20% drop in mortality unless it gets too low. And it's always amazing to me that in the year 2020, we still have no study that really shows that lowering phosphate lowers mortality. So this is an important bit of evidence that it really seems to make sense to lower phosphate because it affects mortality. Take-home message number 2, phosphate additives in food affect laboratory parameters and bones, at least in mice. Here's a very telling study. 10 healthy volunteers received a 1-week diet with 900 milligrams of phosphate. For a normal European diet, and I assume the same is true for you, this would be considered a low phosphate diet. And then, I'm sorry for the German here, this is week. They received another week, same calories and same food composition, but containing mostly processed food. So pizza from the deep freezer, chicken nuggets, whatever, processed food. This is what happened. They ingested the same calories per day, but look at this. The phosphorus intake was 1,070 milligrams on the low additive diet, but it increased by 600 milligrams if you had processed food. And by the way, the sodium almost doubled. So clearly processed food is a rich source of phosphate salts, And phosphate salts, of course, are absorbed 100%. So this is really bad and dangerous phosphate. The following items of McDonald's, but you could easily substitute by Burger King, chicken McNugget, what's it called? Kentucky Fried Chicken, any of those. Look at what contains phosphorus additives. It's amazing. Even cookies, shakes, chocolate drizzle, everything has phosphorus additives. And the University of Michigan recommends that you should avoid menu items that consist of these foods. So in the end, if you look at this list, you can probably eat the menu itself, but nothing else that's served in any of these fast food restaurants. Take-home message number 3. High serum phosphate markedly accelerates calcification of hemodialysis patients, in particular if there are additional pro-calcifying factors. There's a beautiful study that Dr. Ok from Turkey did. He looked at coronary artery calcification scores after 2 years on a dialysate calcium of 1.25 or 1.75. And when he looked at the increase in the coronary artery calcification score, it wasn't different. So he was frustrated. When he looked at the increase in calcification, depending on serum phosphate, well-controlled, not well-controlled, it wasn't different. He was frustrated. But then he combined the two. So if you are dialyzed against a high calcium, and you're being calcium loaded, and you have hyperphosphatemia, you calcify like crazy. And I'm saying calcify like crazy because in only just 2 years, the coronary artery calcification score increased by 500 points. If you and I, with normal kidney function, turn 90 years old, we may have a coronary artery calcification score of 300, 400. We need 90 years for this. These patients with uncontrolled hyperphosphatemia and calcium loading need 2 years to do more than we need for 90 years. So this is really a dangerous situation when your phosphate is not well controlled. Stay away from any calcium loading. Take-home message number 4. We now have many phosphate binders, but many patients don't like them. And I guess I'm not saying anything new to you. This is the standard problem of phosphate binders. Here's a study looking at medication. About 50% of the daily pill burden in dialysis patients is from phosphate binders. And the daily tablet load is already one of the highest of all chronic illnesses, 19 tablets per day. Just imagine the work in getting them out of blisters or putting them together. It's amazing. And you can see here the typical load from a phosphate binder, 9 to 10 tablets with sevelamer calcium acetate, 6 tablets with lanthanum. Why are phosphate binders not taken? This is a study from Wales. 25% report problems. 38 admit that they forget to take it at least once a week. So almost half of the patients simply forget about them. And the reasons for not taking them is, I forgot. The size is too big. I have swallowing problem. This is under-recognized. Many dialysis patients have dry mouth. Too many chewing problems, taste, and not effective. I don't know why they conclude that. KDIGO now provides a stronger statement against calcium-containing phosphate binders in the latest update of the guidelines. So all phosphate binders bind phosphate. This is what we have on the market, but aluminum is very effective. Pill burden is low. These are small pills, But of course, they may have an accumulation problem, and I'm saying may because the aluminum intoxications in the 80s and 90s was mostly through the dialysate, and they're very low cost. Calcium acetate and carbonate, effective, high pill burden, and calcium does accumulate. Sevelamer, effective, high pill burden. This is the one with pleiotropic effects, and when sevelamer came on the market, we were told, oh, look, it lowers cholesterol and uric acid, so it's added benefit. What we only learned later on, it also lowers vitamin D, it binds vitamin K, and it binds L-thyroxine. There's no accumulation, it's more costly. Lanthanum, effective, pill burden low, no pleiotropic effects. It accumulates in the liver, and this apparently is not harmful. But we've learned recently that it also accumulates in the gastric mucosa, and it may relate to GI bleeding, and it's costly. Calcium, magnesium, high pill burden, a little bit of accumulation. Cholestilan is now off the market. At least in Germany, it's essentially like sevelamer. The KDIGO guidelines in 2009 said something which has always annoyed me. We suggest restricting calcium-based phosphate binders if there are calcifications, if there is adynamic bone disease, or if PTH is low. And I'm very happy that this is gone because I've never understood it. Why on earth should you wait for calcification to develop and then act? Because calcifications, once you have them, will not go away. They won't disappear. So it's much nicer to see in the 2017 guidelines the statement, we suggest restricting the dose of calcium-based phosphate binders. Here's a large meta-analysis where calcium-containing ones were compared with sevelamer because the most data are available for sevelamer, and this is all-cause mortality. It seems to be lower with sevelamer. But please note that 2 of the key studies with a benefit are from the same center in Italy, whereas the largest study, this one, really showed very little effect. Here's a recent Japanese study, lanthanum versus calcium carbonate to reduce mortality. A large study. They started with 1,000 patients per arm. But look at this. It's frustrating to see that the probability of cardiovascular events was, if at all, a little higher with lanthanum. Certainly not better than calcium. So in reality, the word is still out and it's unresolved. Take-home message number 6, new iron-containing phosphate binders increase therapeutic options. So the first one that is now on the market, at least in the US, is ferric citrate. It's effective. It has a high pill burden. You need to swallow many of these pills. And there is iron uptake, which can be good. But there's also evidence that some patients really accumulate iron and go into iron overload. So just to illustrate this, this is serum ferritin with sevelamer and calcium acetate or iron citrate. And if you look at the sevelamer curve, it's essentially flat over the 1 year of study. If you look at iron citrate, it goes up from a ferritin of 600 to almost 900. And if you have an arbitrary cutoff, if my ferritin is above 2000, I would get a little nervous. There's no formal upper limit in the guidelines, but I would get nervous. If you look at this, all the red dots indicate patients on iron citrate. So it's quite obvious that with iron citrate, you can go into iron overload. And this was a surprise because I had always taught my junior staff oral iron in dialysis doesn't work. And it's probably the citrate component, The old dialysis doctors amongst us know about this. You could never give aluminum with citrate because citrate opens up the gut junctions in the intestine, and the aluminum ion or the iron is taken up very readily. So it's probably iron citrate, which is the secret why it works orally. And then comes sucroferric oxyhydroxide. Whoever invented that name should be punished. It's an unusual substance. It is composed of iron, but the iron is embedded in a hydroxy group matrix, and this is embedded in starch and sucrose. Now, this is important because of the starch, it's a very loose tablet. It disintegrates very rapidly. So with my youngest son, I did an experiment. We took a pill of lanthanum, which is here, and we took a pill of sucroferric oxyhydroxide, Velphoro, which is the brown one. And we put it into water. 10 minutes later, the lanthanum is still there, but this has fallen apart completely. It doesn't look nice, it's iron, it looks rusty, but it has totally disintegrated. And I've tested it myself. Being a good study physician, I've taken a pill of Velphoro, and the moment it's in your mouth, it falls apart. Now, the interesting thing is, we then let this sit around in the kitchen for 2 further days. My wife didn't like me for that. But after 2 days, the lanthanum pill was still there. It hadn't dissolved at all. And this is the major difference. Lanthanum, you have to chew and chew and chew. Velphoro, it falls apart very quickly. And remember, many patients have chewing and swallowing problems. Here's the key phase 3 trial, sucroferric oxyhydroxide. Here was a washout period. And we then either started sevelamer or Velphoro. And you can see they're both similarly effective over the 1-year treatment. What about ferritin? Yes, it increases a little more with the iron-containing phosphate binder compared to sevelamer. But you will ask, why did sevelamer increase? And the answer is very simple. If you look at the countries, it increases in America. The ferritin increases with sevelamer by 100. It doesn't in EU. It doesn't in other countries. And in fact, what had happened is that we started the trial here when the Americans started bundling. Bundling led to a radical shift of the treatment of dialysis patients away from pushing EPO and going back to pushing iron IV. So this explains why overall the ferritin increases here. But the notable thing is the difference between the 2 arms is 100 in the US, 100 in Europe, 100 in all other countries. So the take-home message here is that, yes, there is a little bit of iron uptake from Velphoro, but it's an order of magnitude lower than with the iron citrate. And so far, I have never heard of a single patient who went into iron overload with Velphoro. Pill burden, that's another big thing. The average daily dose with Velphoro was 1.5 grams per day, and with sevelamer was 6.5 grams per day. And that translated into a mean daily number of tablets of just about 3, 1 per meal with Velphoro, as opposed to 8 with sevelamer. So Vifor then initially started marketing this with 1 tablet per meal. And then somebody of the competitors went to court and said, oh, not true. You cannot claim that because here it was 3.1 tablets per day. So you cannot claim you only need 1 tablet per meal. GI side effects, the most common one with Velphoro is diarrhea, 24%, and it's usually more soft stools, which for many patients is a benefit. And then only 16% of the investigators said the feces is discolored. That is a lie. I'm sorry. I have taken 1 tablet, and after 1 tablet of Velphoro, I had black stools for 2 days. So it should be 100%. Velphoro is iron, and iron colors your feces black. Sevelamer is the opposite. If at all, you have more nausea, more vomiting, and more constipation. The incidence of diarrhea clusters at the very start of the treatment. And actually, many times I tell my patients, yes, look, you have diarrhea, but it will go away. And it probably, this is speculation, it probably goes away because your intestinal microbiome adapts to the iron that all of a sudden comes 3 times a day. 1 year follow-up, very effective after 1 year, as I showed to you earlier, and no difference in phosphate lowering between Velphoro and sevelamer carbonate. And here's one important thing. It's not surprising, but Velphoro is also active in peritoneal dialysis patients. And this is important to stress because this is one of the very few studies who has tested Velphoro versus sevelamer in 100 peritoneal dialysis patients. So I'm already at the end. What did I say? I told you that phosphate control is likely beneficial. It's amazing that after about 70 years of dialysis, we still don't really know. The source matters. Think about whether your patients eat processed foods or whether they go to the market and buy fresh, non-processed foods. And I showed you the beautiful study from Turkey where high phosphate, if combined with calcium, really accelerates calcification like crazy in these patients. Phosphate binders, we all know, and I'm not telling any news to you, that pill burden is the central problem of why patients don't take phosphate binders. Calcium-containing phosphate binders, calcium-free is better. That's what KDIGO suggests. But I would urge you to consider your patient. And I'm saying this because my typical patient on dialysis is 75 years old. So what do I want in a 75-year-old patient? I want them to have quality of life. I want them to eat. And I want them to enjoy life. And I don't really care what phosphate binder they take as long as they eat. The situation is very different, totally different in the 20-year-old dialysis patient. In the 20-year-old, I would take every care to avoid calcium loading and to keep them on something like Velphoro, certainly non-calcium containing phosphate binders, because I want them to receive a kidney transplant and I want them to live long. Whereas the 75-year-old dialysis patient has an average life expectancy of 1.5 years. 1.5 years only. So let them enjoy the 1.5 years, but be strict with the 20-year-olds. Ferric citrate, it is an effective phosphate binder, but it has a significant iron uptake with the possibility of overload. And in terms of pill burden, it's high. You need 10 tablets or so per day of the ferric citrate. sucroferric oxyhydroxide. It's effective, and I haven't shown these data to you. It works at every pH that you encounter between the stomach and the intestine. I showed you the experiment I did with my son, very rapid pill disintegration. There's some but low iron uptake. There's a very low pill burden, roughly 1 tablet per day. And what I haven't shown to you, it has no drug-drug interaction, very much in contrast to sevelamer, which binds vitamin D. Velphoro will not do that. So that concludes tonight's lecture, and I thank you all for listening to me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Professor Jorgen, thank you very much indeed. And it was really a very informative lecture. I really enjoyed listening to it. And I guess I could see no questions here. It seems to be that they understood everything you said. I really appreciate your presence, and I hope to see you in physical, maybe next meeting, inshallah. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Samir? Samir?